History is filled with strange trials, but none is more bizarre than the Cadaver Synod. In this truly insane event, Pope Stephen VI dug up the 9-month-old corpse of his predecessor, dressed it in fancy robes, propped it up on a throne, and yelled at it. Our story is set in Rome, in the year of our Lord 897. And let's be clear, late 9th century Rome was not the majestic, tourist-swarmed city you see today. It was a chaotic, violent, and politically treacherous viper pit. The papacy wasn't just a spiritual office. It was a political throne with immense power, and the great families of Italy and the crumbling Carolingian Empire were all clawing at each other for a piece of the action. Popes came and went faster than fashion trends, and their reigns often ended, well, poorly. We're talking poisonings, blindings, and the occasional unfortunate tumble from a high wall. At the rotten heart of our tale are two men. Well, one man and one, former man. First, let's meet the defendant, the corpse of the hour, Pope Formosus. Before he was a defendant in the weirdest lawsuit in history, Formosus was actually a pretty big deal. A respected bishop, a skilled diplomat, and a man with a reputation for being quite competent. And in 9th century Rome, competence made you a target. He was so good at his job, in fact, that the Pope at the time, John VIII, got insanely paranoid about him. He accused Formosus of everything from coveting the papacy to conspiring with foreign powers and, my personal favorite, seducing the minds of the people. John excommunicated Formosus and forced him to take an oath that he'd never return to Rome or try to be pope. But in the game of popes, never is a very flexible word. In 882, after Pope John VIII was poisoned and then clubbed to death by his own clerics, Formosus's star began to rise again. The excommunication was lifted, and in 891, against all odds, the old man himself was elected pope. He was popular, he was capable, and he had powerful friends. But he also had powerful enemies, and he made a few more during his 5 years on the throne by meddling in the messy politics of the Holy Roman Empire, crowning a guy named Arnulf of Carinthia as emperor, which greatly angered a powerful Italian family known as the Spoletans. Formosus eventually died of a stroke in 896, probably from the sheer stress of trying to keep his head attached to his shoulders. He was buried in St. Peter's Basilica, and that should have been the end of it. A successful, if turbulent, career. Rest in peace, right? Wrong. Enter our antagonist, our prosecutor, our plaintiff with a serious axe to grind, Pope Stephen VI. Stephen becomes pope about 2 months after Formosus dies, and to say he has a vested interest in tearing down Formosus's legacy is the understatement of the century. Stephen was from the rival camp, a man who had actually been made a bishop by Formosus, but whose loyalties lay firmly with that angry Spoletan family, specifically with a man named Lambert of Spoleto, who believed he should be Holy Roman Emperor, not Formosus's guy, Arnulf. For Stephen and his Spoletan puppet masters, Formosus wasn't just a dead rival, he was a political stain. Every decision he made, every priest he ordained, every king he crowned, it was all illegitimate in their eyes. A dead man can't fight back, but his legacy? Oh, you can tear that down. You can salt the earth where it grew. You just need to get a little creative. And so, in the dead of winter, in January of 897, Pope Stephen VI convenes a holy meeting of bishops and cardinals. But this isn't about church doctrine or liturgical calendars. This is about settling a score. Stephen orders the body of Pope Formosus to be exhumed. Let that sink in. For 9 months, Formosus had been rotting in his crypt. Now, soldiers are smashing through the marble, cracking open the sarcophagus, and dragging his decaying body out into the winter air. The stench alone must have been biblical, but they're not just digging him up for a backyard burial. Oh no. They clean him up, as best you can clean up a 9-month-old corpse. They painstakingly redress him in his full papal vestments, the rich chasuble, the silk gloves, the pallium draped over his bony shoulders. They put the papal tiara on his withered head. He is, for all intents and purposes, Pope again. Then they carry him into the Basilica of St. John Lateran, the Grand Cathedral of Rome, and they prop him up on the throne. The air is thick with incense, trying desperately and failing to mask the smell of death. And Pope Stephen VI takes his seat directly opposite the corpse. The trial begins. Now you have to picture the scene. It's a full-blown courtroom drama, but the defendant is literally falling apart. Stephen VI, consumed by a furious, almost manic energy, starts leveling charges at the silent corpse. He leans forward, his voice echoing through the vast church, and he yells. He yells at the dead body. The charges? Perjury for breaking his oath to never return to Rome. Ambition for coveting the papacy, and violating canon law by switching from one bishopric to another to become pope. These are serious accusations in the church world. But again, he's yelling them at a corpse. To make this farce even more farcical, the corpse needed a lawyer, a defense attorney. So a young, terrified deacon was assigned the role to speak on behalf of the deceased pope. Imagine being that guy. Your boss is a raving lunatic, and your client is a dead corpse. It was a kangaroo court of the highest, most putrid order. The verdict, of course, was never in doubt. Pope Formosus was found guilty. Guilty of all charges. The dead man had lost his case. And now for the sentencing. A simple, "our bad, he was never pope," would have been too clean. Too simple. Stephen needed a spectacle. He needed to utterly obliterate Formosus, body and soul. First, the damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Every act and every ordination performed by Formosus was declared null and void. Hundreds of priests and bishops across Europe suddenly found out their careers were built on a lie. Their holy orders were invalid. It was bureaucratic chaos on a continental scale. Then they turned to the body itself. With righteous fury, the guards stepped forward. They ripped the papal vestments from Formosus's decaying form, the fine silks tearing away patches of desiccated skin. They took the 3 fingers of his right hand, the fingers he used to give blessings, and with a sickening crunch they hacked them off, one by one. The message was clear. This man had no authority to bless. His power was a sham. But Stephen wasn't done. He couldn't just rebury the mutilated corpse. That would be too respectful. Instead, he ordered the body to be stripped of all its remaining finery, dragged out of the church, and thrown into a common burial plot for foreigners. A final, posthumous humiliation. Even that, however, wasn't enough for his seething hatred. A few days later, driven by paranoia or pure spite, Stephen had the body dug up again. This time, they tied weights to its ankles, dragged it through the jeering streets of Rome, and with a final, ignominious heave, threw the body of the 82nd Pope of the Catholic Church into the Tiber River. As the rotting corpse of Pope Formosus bobbed away on the muddy currents, Pope Stephen VI probably felt a sense of triumph. He had won. He had erased his enemy from history. Or so he thought. The thing about putting a corpse on trial is that it tends to upset people. Even by the brutal standards of 9th century Rome, the Cadaver Synod was seen as a step too far. It was grotesque. It was sacrilegious. And most importantly, it was politically stupid. The people of Rome were horrified, not necessarily because they loved Formosus, but because the whole affair stank of a profane madness that unsettled everyone. The city began to murmur, and then a miracle happened. Or more likely, a lucky coincidence that was spun into a miracle. A fisherman snagged the body of Formosus in his nets, pulled it from the Tiber, and claimed it began to perform miracles. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. The story spread like wildfire. Formosus was now a martyr, a saintly figure desecrated by a madman. Public opinion, which had been a simmering pot of discontent, boiled over. The chaos Stephen had unleashed by annulling all of Formosus's acts had created a powerful new block of enemies, all the priests and bishops he had just fired. The political winds shifted with brutal speed. A huge riot erupted. The people stormed the Lateran Palace, seized Stephen VI, and threw him into a dungeon. His end was swift and poetic. In summer of 897, less than a year after his ghoulish spectacle, Pope Stephen VI was strangled to death in his cell. The popes who followed immediately tried to clean up the mess. The Cadaver Synod was officially condemned. The body of Formosus, now a holy relic, was recovered, given a hero's welcome back to Rome, and reburied in St. Peter's Basilica in full papal honors. The Church tried its very best to pretend the whole thing never happened, issuing decrees forbidding any future trials of dead people, which really feels like a rule you shouldn't have to write down. So, what are we left with? A story so bizarre it sounds like fiction. But it's not. It's a testament to how personal, how petty, and how utterly unhinged power can make people. It's a rotting reminder that history is not a grand, noble procession of heroes. It's a chaotic, messy, and often ridiculous story written by flawed, ambitious, and oftentimes insane people. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking it and subscribing to the channel.